Well, hello everybody. What's going on? What we're looking at here is an Italian bicycle pump. It's made by Silca. Silca has a reputation for pretty high quality, even back in the early days when their pumps weren't sky-high prices. Now, the one we're looking at here is, I think it's a pista, would be what they call it, and this would be considered a track pump. They're fairly low in cost, although you still do get a lot of their quality as far as gauges and the valve there at the end. Interesting thing about that valve, it is reversible, so that it does do both type of bicycle stem valves, which are a Schrader, which we have here in the US, and abroad I think they also use, I think it's called a Presta valve, which is the long skinny one. Anyway, you can take that thing apart, and by switching around some internal components, you can use either one. Cost-wise of this, if you were to buy it today, again, you'd have to buy one used. I don't know that they necessarily make this particular model anymore. Probably $30, $40. I got mine for around $5. It did not have any compression. And so what I thought was, well, I'll get this thing home. It's only $5. And we'll see if we can make it work. So those clamps there normally wouldn't be in that position, but I did start, and then I thought, well, let me go ahead and film this thing and see if it's interesting. So we'll set that aside and then take our reversible valve there off, or at the end. I'm not even sure if that's the right word for it. So on with disassembly. The top cap is held on by 2 Phillips head screws. Take that off and give it a little bit of a wiggle, and the main part of the pump just pulls right out. The main nut that holds everything together in there is 17 millimeter. The cup here, instead of pulling off, I found was easier if you sort of screwed it. I didn't want to tear it. Also, you saw a washer kind of dropped out. The little plastic nut here, I guess we'll call it, keeps the leather cup from going too far up or moving around in there. And of course, we just saw the spring. And that's pretty much it for disassembly of the tube parts. I like to lay everything out kind of in the order that I took them off, and then that way I know how they go back on. On this, it's relatively simple. You really wouldn't get too confused about anything. But if certain things have an orientation, so if I'm looking down at it and I go to take it off, I set it down the way that I took it off. So when I go to put, let's say, like this leather washer back or leather cup back on, I know that it needs to not go on that way first, but on this way. And here we see that plastic nut, which is kind of a little dirty, but you see that it's got a couple of cracks in there. And I think this probably somebody was in there before and maybe over tightened it, or really cranked down on the metal nut, and it caused it to crack. So my plan was, let's go ahead and clean this thing up a bit, get the gunk out of it, and then give it a little bath so we can kind of see what's going on. And once I got it cleaned up, I thought, well, maybe I can super glue this thing. But unfortunately, I didn't have much luck with getting that crack right there sealed back up. I was able to glue it, but it just would never hold. So let's go ahead and take that tube off and the gauge. It's held on just with a couple of bolts. Disassembly of this stuff is actually really quite simple. I will say that even for their base model, and this is where we see both the bolts will come up through there and hold the tube on. But anyway, for the base model, it's actually pretty well made. The, I guess we'll call it the valve body is all brass, heavy brass. This little rubber, I don't know, wipe or seal that goes on the bottom there. You can, if you want to get new parts, even for something that is as old as this, it's probably 80s era, you can write to Silca or email them, I guess I should say, and they will be able to ship you out some new stuff. Earlier when we took these bolts off, I noticed that one of them was missing its washer. So let's go over and see what we got. Hey, focus that thing. There we go. All right, let's take this over to the bench, see if we can sort through it, and maybe find something, while maybe not an exact match, it is relatively similar. And I think we were able to find something there that should work for us. Again, not an exact match, but hey, we'll take what we can get. I wanted to show you real quick the main pressure valve there. And you can see it's all brass. It's nicely done. I think that eventually maybe I'll go in there and take everything apart. But for now, I just sort of wanted to see if I could get the compression going. The base appears to be aluminum. And it's nicely made, so we'll give that a little bit of a scrub, and then we will go ahead and start with the reassembly once we get it kind of dried off. And again, these things are very, very simple. So if it's you've got something like this and it's not working, don't be afraid to go ahead and take it apart. Or if you find one of these in a thrift store and it is not working, especially if it's a El Cheapo price like I got, if it's only $5 and everything else on it seems to be okay, nothing's bent up or anything like that, go ahead and give it a shot. And again, reassembly, very, very simple. As far as I guess we'd call this technically a machine. As far as the machine goes, it's simple. I'm using a number 4 Allen head wrench here. On that, when you tighten them, I don't think you really need to horse them down or anything like that. Just get them to where they're nice and snug. So we'll set this guy aside and get started on our reassembly. And again, here, like I talked about before, it's nice if you have things laid out one after the other. You know sort of how things go on, what's going to go onto the shaft first, or the direction it came off is the direction I like to put it back on. Again, with there being the crack in there that the super glue unfortunately didn't hold, I put this on and didn't want to over tighten it. Again, I think that the only purpose of that is to prevent that leather cup from moving around, and it gives it something to press back on. I suppose if that thing does shatter, I could always just use a nut and some washers of the same diameter as the leather cup, just to keep it from collapsing, to help it keep its shape a little bit. So we'll put our washer back on, and then we'll snug up our nut here in a second. And I didn't give it, like I said, too much of a major tightening. I just put it on there just enough to hold the thing, and so we just give it a little bit of a twist. One of the things that does help to form a seal in there, which allows you to push air down there, is you've got to have some type of grease or something in there. And this is what I have. It's just the El Cheapo grease from Walmart. And put a liberal amount on there, and then when you stick it back in the tube, I don't know if you can hear that, but you do hear it start to press some air down. So realistically, probably all that needed was just needed to be greased. So give that a little bit of a tap, put your screws back in, and reassembly of the actual pump is done. All you got to do now is put your hose back on, and then go ahead and put your valve back on. Oh, that's another thing about the valve. It's actually very well made, pretty much all brass. There is a rubber ring inside there as well, and a couple little plastic pieces. But again, I was very impressed with the quality of it. I don't think you would get that on something that you could buy for $30 or $40 today. I found these clamps to be a little fiddly. I don't know if I would do a hose clamp or not. Well, anyway, let's go ahead and take a look here for the moment of truth. Does this thing work? Will it actually air up a tire? Oh, the way you put the valve on is you just screw, it screws onto the threads on the bicycle valve. So we see there it is. It is working well. So all in all, a relatively very simple kind of repair on this. I don't know that I would go so far as to call it a restoration. I didn't paint anything or do anything like that. But for only $5, I think it's actually pretty good. And here's the thing all buttoned up. Thanks for watching.